Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Sasuke Retsuden, the Uchiha Descendants, and the Heavenly Stardust. Chapter 6. Gaw. Gaw. The reanimated terrorists flew above Sasuke's head, squawking loudly. There were at least 10 of them. He clicked his tongue at them and stopped his feet, which had been about to run back to the observatory. "Sakura," he shouted. "Go to the observatory and find Zansel." "What about you?" she cried. "I'm going after those dragons." Catching that group of flyers took priority. If they scattered and fled, even Sasuke wouldn't be able to go after all of them. Sakura nodded and took off toward the observatory. Sasuke was about to use Susanoo flame control to climb into the sky, but before he could, the enemy brought the fight to him. A terror landed before him, and Zansel slid off of its back, the same old easy smile on his face. "So this is where you were, number 487. Zansel." Sasuke glared coldly at the director of the observatory. "It was you who brought the dragons back. To what end?" Zansel chuckled. "Why on earth would I tell you? I do have some questions I'd like to ask you, however. You won't answer mine, but you expect me to answer yours?" Sasuke said, hoping to draw out the conversation while he considered how he could make Zansel with the signs to undo the jutsu. The trouble was his fake eyes. Sasuke could stare as deeply as he wanted into a pair of glass eyes, but he could never cast an ocular jutsu on them. Could he use physical force, make the man with the signs under pain of death? Whether Zansel would break under torture or not really depended on how loyal he was to the Prime Minister. "It seems you don't understand your position," Zansel said. "You're nothing more than a shinobi separated from your country, but I have political power." "Edo Tensei is a forbidden jutsu," Sasuke told him. "If you're going to act like you represent the country, then your country as a whole will be punished." "Edo Tensei?" Zansel arched an eyebrow. "Is that what they call the forbidden jutsu to bring the dead back to life in your country?" So the jutsu he was using wasn't exactly the same as the Edo Tensei that Sasuke knew. Boom! He heard a sudden loud rumble from behind, and then the sound of something clattering and crumbling. Most likely, part of the observatory wall had been smashed. Had Sakura made it there safely? He glanced up at the top of the cliff, and Zansel's gaze followed in response. The man could clearly see Sasuke's movements, but not with his own physical eyes. He was getting his information on his surroundings through some other means. Sasuke returned his gaze to Zansel. "Are you planning to use the reanimated dragons as weapons? To back the Prime Minister's conspiracy?" "Oh, word travels fast. The fact that you know that means you also have comrades in Negar then?" "And if I did?" "I'd be delighted," Zansel said. "It's an excellent opportunity to round up all of the Prime Minister's opponents in one fell swoop." The corners of Sasuke's mouth turned up. "Is slaughtering everyone here also part of the Prime Minister's plan? What issue is there with that?" Zansel's face suddenly grew serious. "It's only natural that they should die. Despite having broken the laws of this country, they are granted life and live on carefree. The truth is I almost hate to send them to the bellies of my precious dragons, but I have no choice if I'm going to keep word about the dragons from getting out. I would never be out here supervising the nation's trash if not for the Prime Minister's plan. I have real political power. I am the brains of this land. Not replaceable hands and feet like that lot." Growing more and more excited as he spoke, Zansel pushed up his glasses, which had slid down almost the length of his face to his lips, and cried ecstatically, "I would never have come to this place if not for the Prime Minister's plan." Zansel appeared deeply loyal. It was unlikely Sasuke could beat the information he wanted out of him some other way. He activated his Sharingan and turned eyes full of red light towards Zansel. He checked the amount of chakra in his body, and the tomo floating in his eyes wavered in confusion. The amount of chakra flowing through Zansel's body was absolutely no different than that of an average person. He was not a shinobi. There was no way he was the one using Edo Tensei. What does this mean? If it wasn't Zansel, then who brought back the dragons? What's the matter? You look a little pale. Zansel grinned, excitement still on his face. In the next instant, Sasuke felt a murderous bloodlust in the air around him and leaped back. Minno's fangs clamped down on the hem of his jacket. A gliding terror grabbed onto Zansel's collar and yanked him back up. Into the air. Minno, the rest is up to you, Zansel called as he flew away. Finish him off. The reason Zansel jumped onto a Terra and sought me out was to keep me here for Minno to attack. His Sharingan still activated, Sasuke faced Minno. Orochimaru and Kabuto had controlled their targets with tags embedded in their heads, but he could see nothing of the sort on Minno's head. It seemed that this jutsu operated by a different mechanism from the Edo Tensei that Sasuke knew. And now that he was thinking about it, wasn't the jutsu that Orochimaru and his ilk used a refinement of the second Hokage's proposed technique? But reanimated beings using this refined jutsu were likely immortal in the same way as those reanimated with Edo Tensei. To stop Minno, Sasuke would have to restrain him without killing him by using the black flames that only died when the target was incinerated, Amaterasu. But if he did that, Minno would suffer endlessly, enveloped in an eternal conflagration, unable to die. If Sasuke was backed against a wall and left with no other choice, he would have to call on Amaterasu to get the job done, but he preferred to avoid that option if he could. Long ago, his older brother had broken Kabuto's Edo Tensei with Kodo Anatsukami, a jinjutsu using the Mangekyo Sharingan of Uchiha Shisui. The ideal outcome would be for him to override the jutsu here in the same way. But he was up against an animal. Could it actually work against a creature without the intelligence of a human being? Minno, Sasuke called. Minno crouched down in response. The black pupils that floated in his yellow irises narrowed sharply. Attack position. Don't move just yet. Stay calm and listen to my voice. Sasuke took a slight step forward, and Minno opened his large maw and leaped at Sasuke like a spring coil being released. Sasuke drew his sword and stopped Minno's fangs with the scabbard. The lizard grew excited and clawed at the sword with his front leg to try and break it. Sasuke could see a fresh scar where the oil had burned Minno's stomach. It seemed that he was slow to recover from burns, unlike cutting and stabbing wounds. Go ahead and chew on it. Sasuke slowly let go of the scabbard and reached a hand toward Minno's stomach. The watchful lizard crunched through the scabbard. Relax. It's okay. I won't hurt you. Sasuke held his hand against Minno's belly and worked his chakra in his fingertips. He produced ice by super chilling the mist made from water style with wind style. Surprised by the sudden cold, Minno flinched. SHH. Sasuke covered Minno's burn. The ice crackled and settled, protecting and cooling the affected area. Minno shivered and cocked his head, as if peering at Sasuke's face. The hostility had faded from his eyes. Or so it seemed. Minno, I apologize for cutting your stomach. Sasuke slowly reached out to the beast's damp nose. It hurt, didn't it? I'm sorry. I won't do it again. In the next instant, Minno yanked his mouth open. Sasuke could have dodged the bite, of course, but he dared to let him clamp onto his right arm. Snorting, Minno closed his mouth, eager to bite and crush Sasuke's arm. Minno, he said, his arm still in Minno's mouth. It's only natural that you're angry. Forced awake when you're happily asleep there isn't anyone alive who wouldn't be annoyed. I mean, I'd tear the person who did it limb from limb. Minno grunted quietly, mouth still around Sasuke's arm. Hey! Don't you want to go back to where you were and sleep peacefully? I can send you back there. But to do that, I need your help. Minno's breathing became quiet. The eyes that were narrowed sharply like pine needles grew somewhat rounder and turned up curiously at Sasuke. The moment their eyes met, Sasuke focused his power in his eyes. Sharingan. Minnow was already under the control of Edo Tensei. But with the power of Sasuke's eyes bearing down on him, his body twitched ever so slightly, and Sasuke felt hope that this might actually work. Minnow's jaws loosened, and Sasuke thrust the arm further into the beast's mouth, grabbed the long tongue, and poured chakra directly into the mucous membrane. Minnow gagged and flailed, and then became suddenly quiet, like his strings had been cut. Did I manage to overwrite the control with Jinjutsu? He had only ever had a few chances to use Jinjutsu on non-human subjects, so he wasn't entirely certain it had worked. He released the tongue in his hand, and Minnow slumped over onto the ground. The long tail twitched. "Minnow," he said. Minnow slowly lifted his eyelids, and hazy yellow eyes focused on Sasuke's face. Instantly, his tail snapped out. Bam! Minnow kicked at the ground and charged at Sasuke. He started to reach for a kunai to meet the attack, but then he noticed a slight change in Minnow's eyes and let the tension drain out of his body. Minnow threw his front legs up into the air and brought the weight of his body down on Sasuke's shoulders. Sasuke didn't resist and allowed himself to be knocked over backward to the ground. Minnow threw himself on top of Sasuke and began to lick away the blood oozing from the bite marks on Sasuke's arm. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Yee. Let go, stop. Iowa. What the hell are these things? Where'd they come from? Stop. Stay away, don't. Stay back, stay, the confused cries of prisoners. Mysterious and enormous monsters crawled out from the massive rift in the courtyard and attacked anyone nearby. Suddenly being slaughtered, the prisoners began to scream in terror. Where are they? Where are they coming from? After being resurrected in the secret basement directly below the courtyard, the dragons had pushed through the ceiling to make their way outside. But the prisoners had no way of knowing all of this and had absolutely no idea what was happening. All they could do was run for their lives. The Spinos came out after the terrorists. They were small dragons, about the height of a human being. They made optimal use of their maneuverable bodies as they jumped up and bit into heads and faces. One bite was enough to satisfy them, however, and they quickly moved on to their next target while the head-injured prisoners writhed in agony on the ground, mortally wounded but still alive. The residential building was a hovel to begin with, and it collapsed easily under a barrage of headbutts from the pachycephalors. The prisoners who were slow to flee were crushed in the ruins of the building, but that was perhaps a more fortunate death. At the very least, they died without fear and extended suffering. The pachycephalors had thick, hard, dome-shaped heads that they lowered as they charged their prey in straight lines. A fleeing prisoner tripped and fell, and the prisoners behind him all stumbled over his prone body and fell like dominoes. The pachycephalors rushed the pile of fallen prisoners, some dozen people, trampling some, headbutting others. All of them died instantly. The ones who survived this moment continued to flee until they reached the wall that surrounded the observatory and found that they had nowhere left to run. Damn it. The wall on the south side was already half destroyed thanks to the hard head of a pachycephalor, but it was still almost entirely intact on the north side. One man tried to climb it using the person near him as a stepping stone but was clawed back down. A pachycephalor took a menacing step forward and crouched down. I'm done for. A prisoner slumped down on the spot in despair, while another wept and beat at the wall. The pachycephalor pushed its iron-hard head forward and charged. The men silently braced for their deaths. Oh yay! In tandem with this sudden cry, the wall behind them crumbled and fell away. And the doctor from the infirmary came racing through from the other side of the dust cloud. The prisoners poured through the hole in the wall. Screaming and yelling, they scrambled to be the first to get outside. The pachycephalor froze in confusion, and in the next instant, it took a powerful blow to the jaw and hit the ground. Sakura turned to the main building as she shouted for the prisoners to escape to the outside of the wall. The dragons would still come after them whether they fled or not, but they had a better chance at survival by running than they did clumping together up against the wall. She could hear moans and cries of pain everywhere and saw many writhing in pain on the verge of death. As a medical ninja, it was almost impossible to simply walk by them, but in that moment, her call to duty was to save the many over the few. She had to choose sacrificing these lives for the sake of saving the most prisoners as possible. She had to find Zancel right away and make him release the jutsu, or there would be even more casualties. She had no extra time for the stairs, so she concentrated her chakra in the soles of her feet and ran up the wall, heading straight for the director's office. She kicked out a window and climbed inside, but there was no sign of anyone in the room. She checked his desk and bookshelves but couldn't find any documents related to the reanimation jutsu. Where on earth? She frowned and then decided to search with a fine-toothed comb from the 4th floor all the way down to the basement. As she slipped down the long corridor and descended to the 3rd floor, she encountered a group of prisoners huddled on the landing. They had apparently arrived here in their flight from the rampaging dragons outside. "It's too dangerous in here. You need to escape through the wall. Run as far away as you can." Sakura urged the prisoners outside and then checked the rooms on the 3rd floor from one end to the other. The observation room, reading room, the guards' private chambers. Zancel was nowhere to be found. She had to find him. The number of victims would only increase with every passing minute. She hurried down the corridor and turned the corner, where she bumped into someone. "Gigi," she said. "Doc? You're okay?" "Sure, I'm glad for that." Gigi let out a sigh of relief. "But what is this? What's going on? I seriously don't know which way's up. Where'd those huge monsters come from?" "It's the director's work," Sakura explained quickly. "He used the fossils to revive the dead and brought back the dragons. I have to find him and get him to release the jutsu. If you're looking for Zancel, he was in the courtyard a minute ago." "What?" She stared at Gigi in surprise. "He's outside?" Use of a high-level jutsu like Edo Tensei required a stable environment. She had assumed that the user would be hidden away from prying eyes somewhere in the observatory. But it seemed that she had misread the situation. "Thanks, Gigi. You should hurry and get out of here too." "Yeah, I'll be doing that." Gigi nodded but then yanked hard on Sakura's arm. Caught off guard, she staggered and fell against his chest and felt an abrupt, sharp pain in her spine. "What?" Sakura dropped to her knees and slumped forward. The kunai stabbed into her back clattered to the floor. "Sorry, document." Thump. Her heart pounded heavily, and the core of her being shuddered. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, and her feet and hands were suddenly freezing cold. In contrast, her insides seized like they were on fire. She felt like all the cells in her body were boiling. These symptoms. They were the same as when Sasuke was poisoned by Minnow. "You were working with Zancel." Sakura could only move her eyes. She glared up at Gigi. "I was. Even after we learned you were working with Sasuke, we strung you along. We couldn't solve the mystery of Map of the Heavens ourselves." Gigi crouched down and pulled the vessel with the ultra particles from her pocket. "Give that back." She desperately forced a numb, trembling hand to clutch Gigi's ankle. She couldn't let him have the ultra particles. She promised Naruto that she would return with Sasuke and a clue. Gigi cleft his tongue and kicked her in the face. Sakura slammed into the wall, causing her head to split and crack. The shock of the impact raced up her spine all the way to the top of her head. She was less and less able to move by the second. Forget standing up, it was all she could do to keep breathing. "Ah, she panted. "Personally, I really do think you're great." With dark eyes, Gigi peered at her face and went on apologetically. "You remind me of my girlfriend, your voice, the way you move. I do honestly feel bad you're going in this place. But you're not Margot." He wove signs in front of his chest, and the earth shook beneath them. The rupture in the courtyard ripped open even further, tearing up the almond tree by the roots before it could welcome its first blossoms with the coming spring. An enormous snake-like creature covered in scales crawled up from a hole in the ground. "What is that?" Huddled together, the prisoners looked up at the monster, so massive that it nearly blocked the moon from view. The head and neck attached to the snake torso were at least 10 meters long together, matched on the other end by a tail of the same length. A titan, the most powerful dragon in all of history, gazed down on the 4 stories of the observatory. Awakened from a sleep of tens of thousands of years, the enormous creature raised its head to the heavens as if stretching. Its long tail swung out and tore through the residential building, knocking the heavy roof tiles up into the air like droplets of water that then rained down on the area. "That thing's so ridiculously huge that it destroys everything near it with even the smallest movement," Gigi remarked. It wasn't revived until the very last. The gigantic beast brought a foot down with an earth-shaking thud, and the entire observatory shifted suddenly. Unable to bear the weight of the mammoth creature, the building's foundations had crumbled. The room bent and twisted, and cracks raced across the ceiling. Before her eyes, the fissure snaked all the way out to the hall. The plaster walls peeled and fell away like wafers. Gigi set a foot on the window frame, and the massive beast lowered its head to welcome the ninja. He jumped down onto it and looked back at Sakura. Later, document. The ceiling boards disintegrated, and the pieces rained down on the prone Sakura. With her body ignoring her desperate commands for it to move, she was swallowed up by the rupture in the floor and slammed into the stairs a story below. Roof tiles hit her in the face, a falling wall pinned her down, and her field of vision went black. With Sakura still inside, the observatory collapsed with a roar. His conspirator was Gigi. Sasuke raced with Minnow against the stream of fleeing prisoners and hurried to the observatory, slicing down all the dragons he encountered. Zansel had referred to Kakashi as her comrade. The only one who knew that Sasuke had a comrade was Gigi. Zansel wasn't a shinobi. The one using Edo Tensei was Gigi. He had concealed his true nature so that Sasuke couldn't see that he was a shinobi. He had mastered a forbidden jutsu and had brought back to life multiple dragons at once. There was no doubt that he was a skilled ninja. The observatory was in a terrible state. The wall, residential building, and library were all crushed. Only the main building was still standing, but just barely. The battered bodies of prisoners lay in piles everywhere, and dragons had their heads thrust into those heaps, feeding. In the chaos of everyone wildly trying to escape, Sasuke couldn't see any sign of Sakura. If she was looking for Zansel, she would have been in the main building. "Minnow, we part ways here. You help the prisoners escape. Get as many out as you can. Okay?" He turned toward the main building. At the same time, there was a tremendous trembling of the earth. The rupture in the courtyard turned into a ravine, and an enormous dragon, likely 30 meters long, appeared from below. The foundation was crushed under its weight, and the walls of the main building cracked and snapped. And then the whole courtyard collapsed. Every other thought flew out of his mind. His wife was still inside the observatory. Sakura. Sasuke leaped into the cloud of dust and shoved aside. "Rubble. Sakura. Where are you?" He got no reply. He looked with his Sharingan, but he couldn't detect any trace of her chakra and panicked even more. If he didn't know exactly where she was in this mess, he couldn't simply knock the rubble aside. Sakura was no average jonin. Normally, being trapped under this amount of rubble would have given her little trouble. But not so if she couldn't use her chakra. The poison painted on Minnow's claws. If the same poison was used on Sakura, she wouldn't be able to get out of this collapsed building using her own strength. Having experienced the poison himself, Sasuke knew that better than anyone else. Damn it. He bit his lip in frustration. Wasn't there any way to find her? He racked his brain desperately, but in his frantic state, he couldn't think straight. In the end, all he could do was dig at the mess of bricks and wood before him. Answer me. Sakura. When Sakura came to, the first thing she saw was a peeling plaster wall. The tip of a nail poking out from it had stopped 2 centimeters from her right eye. What happened? Digging into her hazy memories, she remembered that she had gotten pulled into the collapse of the observatory. When she turned her gaze downward, she found a large pillar lying across her lower body. She could sense wetness along the back of her thighs, but she couldn't determine where the bleeding was coming from. When she breathed in, an unpleasant sensation rose from deep in her chest, like her internal organs were twisting around. Very tentatively, she tried moving. Her left hand was stuck, caught under something, but she could move her right hand. She pushed on the piece of wood in front of her, and it slid away so that her field of vision opened up just a bit. The narrow slice of night sky was clear on the other side of the dust, framed by the remains of the building. She tried to knead her chakra, but there was absolutely no reaction from the chakra channels that should have been active inside of her. This was bad. Her body was numb, unmovable, and only wheezes came from her throat when she tried to call out. She couldn't make any sound. And if she couldn't work chakra, Sasuke's Sharingan wouldn't be able to find her. She would have to get out of here on her own. NGH. Sakura forced her twitching arm to move and tried to push away the pillar weighing down on her body. The instant it moved the tiniest bit, she heard a clattering as something slid down somewhere else, and her hand froze. If she moved this chunk of what had been the observatory, another part of the wreckage might come crumbling down. Given that she didn't know if anyone else was buried there with her, she didn't dare push the pillar any further. She was trapped. Oh. She panted, her vision growing pale and hazy. It was impossibly frustrating that she was stuck here like this. Helpless, while reanimated dragons were attacking prisoners outside. Her pulse faded to a muted tapping, and the world around her became almost terrifyingly quiet. Her limbs were cold as ice, almost like she was dying slowly from her extremities inward. The cells in her body were utterly exhausted and wanted nothing more than to stop functioning. No. If I pass out now, I'll die. Sakura bit her lip and tried desperately to remain conscious, but she couldn't do anything about the strength leaving her body. As a medical ninja, she was well aware that this wasn't the sort of poison that could be overcome through sheer willpower. Cherry pink eyelashes slowly veiled her field of vision. Her consciousness sank to the bottom of her brain. Sakura. The familiar voice yanked her fading consciousness out from the abyss. She slowly opened her eyes and found the face of the person she wanted to see most in this world there before her. The weight pressing down on her body had disappeared. All of the wreckage around her had been cleared away, and she was being held up, supported by Sasuke's shoulder. Sasuke, she tried to say, but her chest was on fire, and no words came out. Still, she had to tell him what she knew. She forced air through her vocal cords. Betray. Don't talk, Sasuke said curtly and touched the wand on her back. The chakra he sent to the palm of his hand flowed into her with a mild heat, eliminating the poison and the havoc it was wreaking on her body, and warmth returned to her frozen limbs. But the pain suddenly sharpened, and she felt it stab at every part of her body. Can you move? He asked. Her throat still wouldn't do what she wanted it to. Nonetheless, she managed to produce a confirming groan, and Sasuke's face finally relaxed the tiniest bit. Sasuke. She whispered. You came. Thanks. Relieved, the tears she'd held back finally spilled out of her eyes. Sorry, I couldn't stop Gigi. Couldn't do anything. Don't apologize when you're in this sort of condition. The look on Sasuke's face made Sakura feel incredibly guilty when she thought about how she had worried this man. But more than anything else, she was relieved that he was there with her. When she had thought that she might die, the thing that had scared her the most was not seeing Sasuke and Sarada again. The wound on her back slowly closed over, and familiar fingertips wiped her damp cheeks. Magnificent. Standing on the back of the enormous beast, Sansa looked down on the fleeing prisoners and snorted with laughter. Gigi was there beside him. What a glorious feeling. The plan we spent so much time on has at last come to fruition. That it has, Gigi agreed, looking down on the miserable spectacle with cold, hard eyes. The Orniths made liberal use of their unbelievably powerful rear legs, each of which was about double the height of a person, and kicked up dust as they chased the prisoners down. Covered in brown feathers, the creatures looked exactly like ostriches. They mowed everything down with their back legs. Prisoners struck directly were ripped open like water balloons filled with blood and transformed into mere clumps of flesh in the blink of an eye. Sansa watched as sharp talons caught one man in his side and then sliced open his back, leaving him to writhe in agony on the ground covered in blood. How unsightly. Sansa frowned. Gigi, give him peace. Without a word, Gigi looked down at the massive beast they rode on, and the snake-like dragon raised a leg as thick as the trunk of an ancient tree. Thud, thud. It stepped forward and casually crushed the suffering man. Orniths kicked the bodies of prisoners dozens of meters into the air, killing other prisoners when they were crushed under the falling corpses. Sansa stared enraptured at the blood spurting up on the dry earth. What wonderful warriors. I'm certain the Prime Minister will also be pleased, he said and tilted his head back to look at the colossal creatures far above them. Once we slaughter all the prisoners, we'll head for the capital and join up with him. That's all well and good, but don't forget your promise to me, Gigi reminded him. Of course not. Once we kill Nanera and the others, we'll go to Nagar and look for the body of your girlfriend. I do not forget a favor. It's thanks to you being able to use chakra and implement this reanimation jutsu that we have obtained all this battle power. On the ground, an Ornith was dragging its long neck along the earth, sniffing intently. It picked up a scent and trotted toward a pile of stone from the collapsed wall. It bent the talons of its front legs and deftly shoved aside the rubble to reveal Gano crouched down there, shaking. Oh my! I believe he was your cellmate, yes? Sansa turned happy eyes on Gigi, and he nodded wordlessly as he crossed his arms and looked down on Gano. St stayed back. Gano's legs gave out under him, and he scooted himself backwards. His right foot was bare, maybe he had lost his shoe in the chaos. The bright red that adorned the nails on the toes of his hairy, wrinkled feet seemed to belong to another time and place. The Ornith slowly lifted its leg and brought it down toward Gano's skinny body. Eh. His shriek was abruptly cut off. Fresh blood dripped. After a moment's silence, the Ornith's foot left its leg and tumbled to the ground. What? Sansa frowned. Minnow stood between Gano and the ornithology. He sprang at the chest of the bird dragon as it lost its balance with the loss of its foot and bit into it. Graw! Letting out a shriek and toppling over, the Ornith writhed and tried to throw Minnow off. The lizard sank his fangs into the long, flailing neck. Hearing the cries of its fellow, another Ornith flew at Minnow's back. But just as the Ornith was about to strike him, Minnow dodged, and the creature slammed into its wounded comrade. The two Omiths tumbled over and rolled 50 yards, crashing through a number of people unfortunate enough to be in the way. They finally stopped when they smashed into the wrecked remains of the residential building. Gigi, what's going on? Sansa cried. Why is Minnow taking the side of the prisoners? Gigi checked the state of the reanimation jutsu he had cast himself and finally noticed the abnormality. The control over Minnow's been released. Sasuke? Probably. While the Ornith was occupied by Minnow, Gano ran. Sansa suppressed the urge to click his tongue in annoyance and quickly recovered his good mood. Well, fine. They can't hurt us merely by taking Minnow. I hope not, Gigi said. Minnow waged fierce battle with the Ornith, ignoring the fact that it was several times larger. Slipping past its kicks, Minnow leaped at the Ornith boldly and bought time for the prisoners to flee. However, when at first it was 1 against 1, it soon became 2 against 1, and then 3 against 1, until finally Minnow was surrounded by 5 Orniths. Minnow had nowhere left to run. An Ornith closed in, swinging its leg out to kick. Chuck! Sasuke's scabbard stopped the descending leg. He pushed back with the sheath, and the Ornith somersaulted backward with one foot still up in the air. Good work buying time, Minnow grunted happily at Sasuke's praise. Sasuke took a position to guard Minnow's back from the Orniths and asked quietly, "What do you think, Minnow? If it's too much for you, I can take care of these birds." Minnow pawed at the ground as if to say, "Don't be ridiculous." Sasuke smiled slightly and said, "I'm right behind you." The two of them kicked at the ground together, and in the next instant, the Amethyst talons raked through the air. It's not effective to face them squarely. Get some distance and let the enemy come to you. The Orniths had one-track minds, and they charged at Minnow. When Minnow pulled back, their movements were simple and easy to read. Minnow watched for the right moment, as instructed by Sasuke, and sank down low. The talons that came at Minnow sliced through empty air. Above his head, the force of the empty strike knocked the Ornith off balance. Now! Minnow stepped in close to the enemy and ripped out its throat. Everything from the neck up was free from the torso, and the Ornith threw out its legs and dropped to the ground. But dust quickly collected around the wound, and it began to heal. Sasuke stabbed the creature with his long sword to pin the head and body to the ground. Before Minnow had a chance to breathe, a mass of reddish-brown came flying at him from the side. A Tyranno, the most powerful and malevolent of the dragons whose fossils were found in this region. Held down by its incredible strength, Minnow flailed and writhed. But the size difference between them was too great, and Minnow couldn't break free. Seeing the Tyranno holding Minnow down below him, Zancel narrowed his eyes, pleased. A battle between members of the same species, but it doesn't look like it will get too heated, Same species? Gigi asked, surprised. Minnow and the Tyranno? Yes, Minnow is also a Tyranno. Still a juvenile though. When Gigi looked at the two with this new knowledge, he could see that their skeletons were actually very similar. The Tyranno looked reddish-brown because it had been showered in blood splatter, but its actual skin appeared to be the same gray as Minnow's. Gigi didn't know anything about ancient creatures. He had been chosen as Zancel's accomplice because of his abilities as a shinobi. Put another way, Zancel was utterly unfamiliar with the ways of the shinobi. It's a cruel thing to pit Minnow against a fully grown animal. Or perhaps Sasuke isn't strong enough to assist him. Nah, Gigi said. It's probably the Tyranno that's at a disadvantage. Zancel frowned, baffled. What do you mean? Up against the muscular Tyranno, Minnow looked very tiny. Given that they were creatures of the same species, with a big difference in size, it seemed like the contest had been decided before the battle even started. However, with a roar, Minnow pushed the Tyranno back. What? The Tyranno was overcome and flipped over. Before Zancel's surprised eyes, Minnow bit into the stomach of the Tyranno as hard as he could. The larger dragon writhed, rolling this way and that to try and shake Minnow off, but Minnow only dug his sharp fangs in deeper. Absurd, Zancel gasped. Minnow pushed it over? When they're summoned, Kuchio's creatures receive a supply of chakra from the summoner, Gigi explained coolly. Minnow made a contract with Sasuke and is receiving chakra from him. It's only natural that he be stronger than the other dragons. Kuchio's summoning built a mutually beneficial relationship between summoner and summoned. It wasn't a unilateral jutsu where one side got all the help. The summoner lent the summon power, and by gaining the power of chakra, the summon became even stronger. Sasuke's power is an unknown variable, Gigi said. I don't think we can win unless we throw all of them at him. You should have said that sooner. Sansel glared at Gigi and then heard a shout from the direction of the observatory. Oh yay! Followed by boom. The sound of rock shattering. The barely standing western wall crumbled thunderously, and that was the end of the wall that had once surrounded the observatory. It seems there's another rat, Sansel snarled. Leave this to me. You go handle that. Right. This time, I'll finish her off for sure. Gigi turned his gaze up toward the sky, and a Terra flew down and scooped him up. They flew after Sakura as she fled past the ruined wall. So this is what you call biting the hand that feeds you, Sansel muttered, disgusted, and glared at Minnow. Blood dripping from his fangs, the small dragon stared with cold yellow eyes at the man he used to submit to. Behind him was prisoner number 487 Sasuke. I'll make you regret switching masters. Sansel raised his right hand. At his signal, all of the dragons pivoted. The Titan reared with a roar. The Terras circled, pulled their wings in, and dove. Even the hornets that had been pecking at the prisoners' corpses turned toward Minnow. Every single dragon began to stampede toward Minnow and Sasuke. End of Chapter 7. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.